Hello everyone, welcome to another video of my British Chess Championship finals. This is the 6th game that I have played, and a little bit of context is that in the previous video I mentioned that I would be playing Mark Hebden. The published pairings said this much. However, I think about half an hour before the tournament started, or the round started, there was one or two players who could not make it for various reasons, so unfortunately the organisers had to redo the pairings. So I'd spent over 2 hours prepping for Grandmaster Mark Hebden and was a bit shocked that I was not playing him, and I wasn't even the same colour. I was meant to be white against Hebden, but instead I was black against someone I could not take lightly, Oliver Stubbs. I believe we've played once or twice before, and I think I've come off better, but he is definitely someone to fear. And I had a very vague memory of prepping for him before, and I felt like he played the London system a lot. But it's very possible that I had the wrong person. So as black, I decided to head off the London system, if indeed he does play it. Maybe he doesn't. But with c5, bishop f4 is now not advisable. So d5, e5 was played by me, so going into a kind of a snake Benoni or check Benoni, and this prevents bishop f4. So e4 and d6. I'm not going for the snake Benoni when the f8 bishop walks over to a5 with a check. I'm instead playing kind of old Benoni style, knight c3, and then I need to fianchetto. So hopefully going into a check Benoni without any major problems. He throws in a check, and to be honest, I like putting my knight on d7 in these lines and my other knight on e7. So it felt like a no-brainer to play knight d7. If he takes me, I can simply take with the bishop, and I don't see any real issue with this. a4 was played. It's a clever move, because if I had kicked his bishop away with a6, I could have followed it up with b5, but now I can't do that. So I continued development, and so did he. Putting his knight in front of his f-pawn felt a little bit, maybe a little bit inaccurate, but I can't really see a way to exploit that, because if I play f5 straight away, I haven't castled or developed enough. So knight e7, castles, castle. Oh no, I played a6 first. Kicked his bishop away, then castled. So I'm ready to play f5, which is a very key move in the Benoni opening. Generally my plan is, depending on which pawn break I can do, either f5 or b5, the plan is to attack the centre and either kingside or queenside. f5 looks far more appealing to black right now, so my plan was attack the centre and go for the kingside. So knight d2 is played. He's trying to put his knight on c4, where it will attack my d6 pawn, which is my main weakness in the Benoni. He does play it, and I cover d6 by a discovered defence with my queen. And knight f6 improves my knight and attacks his e4 pawn. White, on the other hand, is going to be attacking the centre and going on the queen side in these types of positions. And when he took me, I actually had a conversation with a very, very strong Russian grandmaster, who's a former champion, and he had said that generally you should take with either a knight or bishop on f5 as black. You shouldn't really take with the pawn in lots of positions similar to this, and I wanted to heed his advice, but I really didn't like the look of taking with my knight or my bishop here. He has e4 for his own knights, and also bishop g5 pinning me. So I took with the pawn, thinking that maybe my f5 pawn can now gain some space. He played f4, and if I let him capture, I think that he will have an advantage, so I pushed. And I've got a passed pawn, but white, if they can break with the move g4, or if they can simply slow me down on the king side and then play b4, they may have a very good position here. So bishop e3, and possibly my next move here is a bit inaccurate. I played b6 because my thinking was maybe I can play bishop b7 and round up the d-pawn that white has. And bishop e3 was played. I was actually wondering if he might play a5 in this line. Then I was going to play b5, which is a natural move for black in the Benoni, to save my rook. And then if white plays a sort of nothing move, like king h1, I was then thinking, you know what, I might be able to sacrifice my rook for a knight and a pawn, so a temporary sacrifice, and then it's not easy for white to save the d-pawn. So I have moves like queen b7, and then later on I can take this pawn. So if I have two pawns and a knight in a closed centre, just for a rook, I think I have the edge. But the computer doesn't entirely agree with me, and I'm fairly glad in hindsight that this did not happen. He played bishop f2 with a similar plan of holding his d-pawn, but this time having his knight instead of b6 on e3. It's blockading my e-pawn, attacking f5, preparing g4, and defending d5. So it's a great piece, probably white's best piece on the board. Then my queen starts to slide over, and then I just safeguard the d6 pawn, making sure there'll never be some kind of tactic where I will lose it. Also, queenside play is out of the question for me now. I'm committed to playing on the king side and centre. So once I have my plan, I will attempt to be relentless and go after my opponent on the king side. And he should respond in kind on the opposite side of the board. Queen f7 goes to the pawn. He saves it with rook d1. And again, he is indicating with his rooks, mainly, centre and queen side. So here, this next move may have been a slight error. But I didn't like white playing the move b4. So if I play, again, some nothing move like king h8, b4, and they crash through, my bishop on b7 looks a little bit under protected, and white could easily start gaining initiative on the queen side. So I spent one move just trying to lock it all down with a5. And this does give me lots of weaknesses. c4 and b5 are now useful for the white knights. But I was thinking they might be a bit tied down to guarding the d-pawn. So perhaps I would have enough time to start my kingside play. And king h8 this time isn't such a nothing move, because my plan is to put rooks on the g file, going for them. He plays knight e2, so he's still maybe a touch nervous, but also he's trying to play the move b4 with preparation of c3 and then b4. So if I'm not quick, his queenside could still roll up the board at me. I play knight g4, attempting to get rid of his best piece, his knight on e3, and he trades, and then plays knight g3. So he's aiming at my weak e-pawn. While I could capture on f4, I wasn't really sure about this, because the queens would trade, he would force me back, and I would lose the pawn straight back, so we're now equal on points. And even though the computer says this is actually maybe a tiny bit better for black, I thought that without the queens on the board, my kingside attack has less oomph to it. And white's pieces are very nicely placed in the centre of the board. And I wasn't totally sure how to arrange my pieces in a good way. So it's not that easy for black to proceed. Instead, I played knight to g6, aiming to take on f4. And if he pushes his pawn to f5, I'll go back to where my knight just was, and then take the pawn with the knight. So I think he took, which looks like the best move. I played knight to f4, then bishop h4, and I think I found an excellent move here. This really is the difference between white having the advantage and me having an edge. Because my rook is attacked on d8. If I move to e8 with the rook, then d6 will drop. The knight is threatening the pawn. But if I'm playing moves like rook d7, that isn't really indicating that I'm going for any big attack with rook d7. It'll take me a long time to swing it to f7, and then eventually get something. And also I have to consider rook d7 as a move, and then bishop b5, which will win the exchange off me. So instead, queen g6. which was a very key move. It not only attacks their knight, but it also goes after it goes after the knight, defends my d-pawn, and is attempting to play rook to e8 from d8 next turn. If he takes my rook, I take the knight, and it's a double attack. Both bishops are being pressured, so I will actually lose my rook for 2 pieces. For example, if bishop d3 trying to counter, I can capture it, and then throw in a check, taking the bishop. So I have the 2 bishops for a rook, which is always, a lot of the time it's favourable for the bishops, and also white's pawns are a bit weak. So I can aim at the d5 pawn and capture it next turn. In the game, he did not let me do all this stuff. He played knight to c3. Touch passive, but it makes a lot of sense because you're defending d5 with your knight. You're still on the queen side, but now I have a bit more space. So I played rook to e8. Again, my kingside play is starting to get going. Only really my bishop on b7 is not yet pulling its weight. So there was a part of me that thought I might put it back to where it started eventually and then swing it round to maybe g4 or h3 or f5 in the future. But bishop g3, check. And this was a key move, because if he plays bishop to f2, which I thought was a possibility, I have this excellent move, knight to h3. If he takes my knight, which I thought he would, I have an excellent move. If he doesn't take my knight and moves the king, I can grab the f2 bishop for free. So he has to take me to maintain equality, but then pawn takes, discovered check, his bishop's pinned, whatever he moves, I will move my queen, and g2 is mate. So all of a sudden my kingside play is potentially crashing through. So he played king h1, and then I think I found another key move, bishop to e3, where his queen only has one safe square, e1. Very, very passive, and also lined up with my e8 rook. If queen e1, I could at very least take on c2 and threaten g2 mate. And the computer gives this line where I had looked at this sort of thing and felt like I must clearly have the advantage, but I wasn't sure how big my edge was. It turns out to be like -2, because I have the bishop pair and I'm a pawn up on the queen side. So this would definitely have been enough. However, he played a move I had not looked at, and I played very fast in this opening because I wasn't entirely kind of settled on who I was playing. I mean, I hadn't really come to terms with the fact that I wasn't playing Hebden, so I had sort of blitzed the opening, and some of the middle game as well. I hadn't spent enough time on it, but the good news was that in these key positions I was able to spend a very long time analysing moves, and that really paid off around here, because instead of queen e1 he played bishop d3, and I looked at this for a long time. I thought if I take their queen they take mine, and then I don't win anything in the end. And if I move my queen somewhere, he'll still have to go queen e1, very, very passive. So I played queen h5, queen e1 was played, and now can you see the best move on the board which I found to give me the win? So there's several moves that give black a huge advantage, but the very best one is knight takes g2, and white is falling apart here. The computer move is to play queen e2, where it's absolutely horrible, but instead he played king takes g2, and I had calculated this line. This was the main line that I'd looked at. What did I play here to win the game very quickly? So this was a great moment. I was able to play in all earnestness, not messing around. It is actually the best move. It's the only move leading to mate. Queen takes d5, check. If I'd taken with the bishop, white had ways to block on e4 and it wasn't mate. But here, if my queen is taken, I will simply take and keep taking with my bishop, which ends up mating. And if a move like bishop e4, the exact same thing. Queen takes e4, and we will eventually, in whatever way we do it, reach this final position, which is a beautiful checkmate using my 2 bishops, my rook on f8 and my pawn on g4, and with a little help from his own pieces on g3 and h2 to surround the king and checkmate it. So he resigned when I offered the queen sacrifice 2 moves earlier in this position. So a very nice game, for me at least. I definitely could have played the middle game better, but I'll take it. I'm now on, I believe, 3.5 out of 6. So going into round 7, I'm actually getting floated up to play somebody on 4 points out of 6. So if I win, that will be great. I would then maybe even play the top seed Michael Adams in the penultimate round. And if I don't win, I might still end up being on a plus score at the end of the tournament, depending on what happens. So thanks for watching the video, and see you next time. Bye.